My daughter-in-law tried to drain our entire family savings to buy a luxury car for her own son. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice, I just sat there, folded my hands on the table, and smiled like I hadn't understood a single word she said. What I did next, they never saw coming. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end. And tell me where you're listening from. I've learned that stories like mine travel farther than we ever expect. That afternoon, the sunlight fell softly across my dining room table. The same oak table my husband and I had chosen more than 30 years ago. I had just finished setting out the good china. Though there was no special occasion. Old habits don't leave easily. When you've spent a lifetime making a house feel like a home, you keep doing it, even when the people inside it stop acting like family. At 68, I had grown used to silence. Since my husband passed, the house felt larger, emptier. His chair at the head of the table remained untouched. His reading glasses still rested on the corner of the nightstand. Some mornings, I caught myself listening for his footsteps. That day, my son Daniel had asked to come over. He said he wanted to talk about something important. His voice on the phone had been careful, almost rehearsed, and of course, she came with him, Melissa, my daughter-in-law. She walked into my home like she always did, confident, composed, already in control of the room before she even sat down. Her perfume lingered in the air, sharp and expensive. Daniel followed quietly behind her, avoiding my eyes. We sat at the table. I poured tea for all three of us. My hands were steady. They always are when something feels wrong. Melissa didn't waste time. She leaned forward slightly, placing a neatly organized folder on the table between us. We've been reviewing the family finances, she said, her voice smooth, almost pleasant, and we think it's time to make a smarter investment. I didn't respond. I simply looked at the folder, then back at her. She continued, as if she had practiced this speech more than once, there's an opportunity right now. A limited edition car. It's not just a purchase, it's an asset. Something that will appreciate over time. I noticed the way she said we, but every word belonged to her. And Jason deserves a strong start, she added, referring to her son from a previous marriage. This would set him up in a way most kids can only dream of. That was when Daniel finally spoke. His voice quieter than I remembered. Mom, we just need access to the savings account. Just temporarily. Temporarily. I looked at my son then. Really looked at him. The same boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street now couldn't even meet my eyes while asking me to give up everything his father and I had built. The room fell silent. Melissa smiled, waiting, confident, certain. And I realized something in that moment. They didn't think I understood what they were doing. They thought I was just an old woman, sitting at the table they planned to take from me next. So I smiled back. And I said nothing. Because sometimes, silence is the first move. The house felt different after they left that afternoon. Not louder, not quieter, just altered. I stood by the window in the kitchen, watching Daniel's car disappear down the street. Melissa sat in the passenger seat, her posture straight, her head slightly tilted as she spoke to him. Even from a distance, I could tell she was explaining something, justifying, convincing. She always did that well. I didn't move for a long time. The tea on the table had gone cold. 3 cups, barely touched. A conversation that wasn't really a conversation, just a request dressed up as concern. An investment. That was the word she used. I turned back to the table slowly and began clearing the cups. One by one, my movements were careful, measured, the kind of movements you make when your mind is somewhere else entirely. Because the truth was, this wasn't the first time. It never starts with something that big. People like Melissa don't begin by asking for everything. They begin small, quiet, reasonable. I remember the first time she mentioned money. It was about 2 years ago. Not long after my husband passed. She had come into the kitchen while I was making coffee, leaning casually against the counter like she belonged there. Daniel told me you still handle the savings account. She said, that must be stressful for you. Stressful. I had smiled politely back then. Told her I was fine. That her father-in-law had made sure everything was organized. She didn't push, not that day. But after that, the questions came more often. How much do you keep liquid? Have you considered restructuring? Wouldn't it be easier if Daniel helped manage things? Always gentle, always framed as concern. And Daniel, he started changing too. Slowly. So slowly I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. He stopped asking about me. About how I was sleeping. About whether I'd eaten. Instead, he asked about paperwork, passwords, account access. At first, I told myself it was normal. He was trying to help. That's what sons do, right? But help doesn't feel like being watched. Help doesn't come with silence where warmth used to be. I placed the last cup in the sink and turned on the water, letting it run longer than necessary. The sound filled the room, steady and constant. It helped me think. Because there was something else. Something that didn't sit right. Melissa's son, Jason. 17 years old. I had met him only a handful of times. Polite enough, but distant, always on his phone, always talking about things that felt out of place. Luxury brands, expensive watches, cars. Especially cars. I remembered one dinner a few months ago. He had been showing Daniel something on his phone, his eyes lighting up in a way I hadn't seen before. "This one," he said, "this is the one I want." Daniel had laughed, shaking his head. "That's not exactly realistic, kid." But Melissa, she didn't laugh. She just watched, quiet, thinking. I dried my hands slowly and looked around the kitchen. The same kitchen I had stood in for decades. The same counters, the same cabinets, the same view out the window. Everything was still here. But something had shifted. They weren't asking anymore. They were planning. And for the first time, I stopped thinking about what they wanted. And started thinking about what they thought I didn't know. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I couldn't sleep, but because something inside me had already made a decision. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort you anymore. It just reminds you that you're alone with your thoughts. I made coffee the same way I always did. 2 scoops. A little too strong. Just the way my husband liked it. I still used his mug without thinking. Old habits, they stay long after people are gone. I sat at the kitchen table. The same spot where Melissa had placed that folder the day before. I didn't open it then. I just looked at it. There's a moment, sometimes, when you realize you've been looking at something the wrong way. Not because you're naive, but because you chose to believe the best in people. That morning, I stopped doing that. I reached for the folder and opened it slowly. Inside were neatly printed documents. Numbers, charts, summaries. It all looked very professional. Very convincing. Asset reallocation. Short-term liquidity adjustment, strategic purchase. Big words, clean language. But when you've lived long enough, you learn to look past the words and follow the intent. I turned the pages one by one. And there it was. A withdrawal request. Not partial, not careful. Everything. Every dollar your husband and you spent a lifetime saving. Every late night, every sacrifice, every plan for someday. All of it, reduced to a number on a page. I didn't react right away. I just sat there, my fingers resting lightly on the paper. Because suddenly, another memory came back to me. It was about 6 months before my husband passed. We were sitting right here at this same table. He had a habit of tapping his fingers when he was thinking. And that night, he did it more than usual. "Promise me something," he said. I remember smiling at him. Teasing, "That depends. Is it something expensive?" He didn't smile back. If anything ever feels off, you don't ignore it. I didn't understand what he meant at the time. I thought he was just being cautious. Protective, like he always was. But now, sitting there with those papers in front of me, I understood. He had seen something. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to know that one day, I might be sitting exactly where I was now. Alone. Being asked to give up everything. I closed the folder gently and placed my hand on top of it. No anger, no panic. Just clarity. Because Melissa had made one mistake. She thought this was about money. It wasn't. It was about control. And more importantly, it was about what she believed I wouldn't question. I stood up, walked to the phone, and paused for just a second before dialing. There was only one person I needed to speak to. Someone my husband trusted long before Melissa ever walked into this family. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Good morning. This is Richard Hayes." I took a quiet breath. "Richard, this is Evelyn Carter." There was a brief pause on the other end. Then his tone changed, warmer, more attentive. "Mrs. Carter, I was wondering when you might call." That was when I knew. I wasn't the only one who had been paying attention. Richard didn't ask many questions over the phone. He never did. "That doesn't sound like something we should discuss on a call," he said calmly. "Can you come by the office this afternoon?" I glanced at the clock on the wall. 9:15 a.m. "Yes," I replied. "I'll be there." He paused for a moment before adding, "And Mrs. Carter, bring anything they gave you." "They? Not your son, not your family. They." I hung up the phone slowly and stood there for a second longer than necessary. It's a strange feeling, when someone outside your home sees the situation more clearly than the people inside it. The drive to Richard's office took about 20 minutes. I had made that drive many times over the years, usually sitting in the passenger seat while my husband handled conversations like this. He always said it was just business, something I didn't need to worry about. Now, I wished I had paid closer attention. But maybe he had been paying enough attention for both of us. Richard's office hadn't changed. Same dark wood furniture, same quiet reception area, same woman at the front desk who greeted me with a soft smile that carried a hint of sympathy. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Carter," she said gently. "Thank you," I replied. I didn't correct her. I didn't say it had been months. Grief doesn't follow a calendar. Richard was waiting for me when I stepped inside his office. He stood up immediately, offering his hand, then guiding me to the chair across from his desk. He didn't waste time with small talk. He never had. "You received something from Daniel and Melissa," he said, not a question. I placed the folder on the desk and slid it toward him. "They asked me to sign," I said simply. He opened it, scanning the pages quickly. His expression didn't change, but I noticed the slight tightening in his jaw. That was enough. He understood. "They presented this as an investment?" he asked. "Yes." "And did they explain why the entire account needed to be liquidated?" I shook my head. "They said it was temporary." Richard let out a quiet breath, leaning back in his chair. "I see." Silence settled between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was precise, like everything was being measured. After a moment, he leaned forward again, folding his hands. "Mrs. Carter, did your husband ever discuss the structure of your accounts with you?" I hesitated. "Not in detail." That's what I suspected. He turned his monitor slightly, pulling up something on the screen. Numbers, documents, things I didn't fully understand yet. "Your husband was very thorough," he continued, "especially in the last few years." My chest tightened slightly. "In what way?" Richard looked at me then. "Directly. He made sure that no one could access those funds without your explicit authorization." I nodded slowly. That part, at least, made sense. But then he added, "And even with your authorization, there are conditions." I frowned slightly. "Conditions?" "Yes." He clicked once, bringing up another document. "Certain transactions above a specific threshold require a secondary verification process. One that cannot be initiated by anyone except you, and one that cannot be completed without my office being notified." I felt something shift inside me. Not fear. Not relief. Something sharper. "So even if I signed this," I said slowly, glancing at the folder, "they wouldn't be able to take the money immediately." Richard gave a small nod. "Correct." The room felt quieter than before. More focused. Because now, for the first time since yesterday, I wasn't looking at what they wanted to take. I was starting to see what they didn't know they couldn't. Richard didn't rush me out of his office. He let the silence settle, the kind that gives you space to think clearly. I sat there, my hands resting in my lap, looking at the documents on his desk. For the first time since Melissa placed that folder in front of me, I didn't feel cornered. I felt prepared. "Tell me something," I said quietly. "If I had signed that yesterday, what would have happened next?" Richard didn't answer immediately. He closed the folder carefully, aligning the edges as if the details inside it needed to stay contained. "They would have scheduled a transfer," he said, large enough to trigger review. And then? My office would have been notified. I would have contacted you directly. I nodded once. So they wouldn't get the money. Not without your confirmation, and not without explaining the purpose of the transfer in detail. I looked down at my hands. Melissa hadn't mentioned any of that. Of course she hadn't. She had presented it as simple, clean, immediate. Sign here, move forward, help the family. But there was something else beneath that. Something she either didn't understand, or hoped I wouldn't. Do you think she knows? I asked. Richard's expression didn't change. I think she knows enough to try, he said, but not enough to succeed. That answer stayed with me longer than anything else he said that afternoon. When I left his office, the air outside felt different. Cooler, sharper. Like stepping into a place where everything is exactly as it appears, no pretending. No soft words hiding harder truths. I got into my car but didn't start it right away. Instead, I sat there and thought about Daniel. My son. Because this wasn't just about Melissa. It would have been easier if it was. Easier to draw a line. Easier to assign blame. But Daniel had been sitting right there beside her. Quiet. Agreeing without speaking. I closed my eyes for a moment, remembering the way he used to look at me when he was younger. Open, certain, like I was the one person he could always trust. Somewhere along the way, that had changed. Not all at once. Just enough, over time. When I got home, the house greeted me the same way it always did. Still, familiar. But I wasn't the same woman who had left it that morning. I walked into the kitchen, set my purse down, and went straight to the drawer where I kept the old documents. The ones my husband had insisted I never throw away. Insurance papers, property records, copies of things I never thought I'd need to look at again. I pulled them out one by one, stacking them neatly on the table. There's a kind of clarity that comes when you stop avoiding something. When you decide to look directly at what's in front of you, without softening it. And as I sat there, sorting through years of paperwork, one thought settled quietly into place. Melissa wasn't improvising. She had a plan. A timeline. That car, it wasn't an idea. It was already chosen. Maybe even reserved. And that meant one thing. They were expecting the money soon. I placed the last document down and looked at the empty chair across from me. My husband's chair. He had known me longer than anyone. Long enough to understand one simple truth. I don't react quickly. But when I do, I don't miss. I didn't call Daniel that day. I didn't call Melissa either. Because the moment you show your hand too early, you lose the advantage. The next morning, I drove to the bank. Same branch, same building I had walked into for years. Always beside my husband. He used to handle everything, accounts, signatures, conversations. I would sit quietly, trusting that things were taken care of. This time, I walked in alone. The air inside felt colder than I remembered. Or maybe that was just me paying attention for the first time. Good morning, Mrs. Carter, the teller said politely. How can we help you today? I'd like to speak with someone about my accounts, I replied. Not urgent, not emotional, just clear. A few minutes later, I was seated in a small office across from a woman named Karen. Mid-40s, composed, the kind of person who notices details without making it obvious. I understand you have some questions about your accounts, she said. Yes, I answered, placing my purse on my lap. And I'd also like to review access permissions. That made her pause, just slightly. Of course, she said, let me pull everything up. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, and the screen reflected in her glasses. Numbers, accounts, years of decisions my husband had made quietly, carefully. After a moment, she looked back at me. Everything appears normal, she said. You are listed as the primary account holder. I'd like to confirm, I said, that no one else can initiate a withdrawal without my direct authorization. Karen nodded. That is correct. And if someone attempted to? She hesitated for a second this time. They would need documentation signed by you. And for large transfers, additional verification would be required. I nodded once. I'd like to make a few adjustments. We spent the next 20 minutes reviewing everything. Access levels, contact information, notification settings. I didn't rush. I didn't explain more than necessary. But I made sure of one thing. Every alert, every confirmation, every movement of money, no matter how small, would come directly to me. No intermediaries, no assumptions. Just me. As Karen printed the updated documents, she glanced at me briefly. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Carter?" she asked gently. It was a simple question. But there was something behind it. Not curiosity, awareness. I met her eyes and gave a small smile. "Yes," I said, "I just prefer to stay informed." She nodded, as if she understood more than I had said. When I stepped outside, the sun was brighter than the day before. Or maybe I was just seeing things more clearly. Because now, the pieces were starting to fit together. Melissa had a plan. Daniel was part of it. And they were moving forward, expecting me to follow. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Mom, did you have a chance to look over the documents?" I stared at the screen for a moment. Not at the words, but at what wasn't there. "No, how are you? No, do you need anything?" "Just the plan." I typed slowly. "Yes, I reviewed them." A few seconds passed, then another message appeared. "And, what do you think?" I leaned back in my chair, the phone resting lightly in my hand. They were waiting. Expecting hesitation, maybe confusion, maybe even agreement. I let the silence stretch just a little longer. Then I replied, "I think we should all sit down and discuss this properly." 3 dots appeared almost immediately. "Melissa's doing," I could tell. Then the message came. "Of course, when works for you." I smiled. Because now. They thought the conversation was just beginning. They had no idea. It had already moved far past them. We agreed to meet 2 days later. Not at my house. At a place Melissa suggested almost immediately, a quiet cafe downtown. Neutral ground, public, but private enough for a serious discussion. That told me everything I needed to know. She wanted control of the setting. I arrived 10 minutes early. Old habit. I chose a table near the window where I could see the entrance clearly. Sunlight filtered through the glass. Soft and steady, the kind of light that makes everything look calm, even when it isn't. I ordered tea, sat down, folded my hands in front of me. And I waited. They walked in together. Melissa first, of course. Confident, composed, she spotted me immediately and smiled. The same polite smile she always used when she thought she was winning. Daniel followed half a step behind. He looked tired. Not guilty. Just tired. "Mom," he said as they reached the table. I nodded once. "Daniel." Then I looked at her. "Melissa." She sat down across from me, placing her handbag carefully beside her chair. Daniel took the seat next to her. Not across from me. Next to her. Aligned. "We're glad you suggested talking this through," Melissa began, her voice smooth. "It's important that everyone feels comfortable with the decision." "Everyone." I didn't interrupt. I simply reached into my purse and placed the folder on the table between us. The same one she had given me. "I reviewed everything," I said. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "And?" I met his eyes for just a moment, then shifted my gaze back to the folder. "I have a few questions." Melissa nodded, already prepared. "Of course." I opened the folder slowly. Not because I needed time, but because I wanted them to feel it. The pause, the control. "This transfer," I said, tapping lightly on the page. "You described it as temporary." "That's right," she replied quickly. "It's just a strategic move. The value of the asset will increase. And the asset is the car," I said calmly. She paused, just for a fraction of a second. "Yes. For Jason." Another pause, smaller this time. "Yes." I nodded once, as if confirming something simple. "And where will the car be held?" I asked. "In his name, eventually," she said, "but we'll manage it until then. Of course. We. Always we." I turned another page. "And this account," I continued, "the one you're requesting access to, you're aware that it contains the entirety of our family savings?" Daniel shifted slightly in his seat. "We know, Mom, but it's not like we're spending it. It's just moving it," I finished for him. He nodded. "Yes." I closed the folder gently. No sudden movements, no raised voices. Just quiet. Because now, they were talking freely. Confident. Unaware. Melissa leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice just enough to sound reassuring. "I know this feels like a big step," she said, "but sometimes you have to think long-term. Jason has opportunities ahead of him. And this is the kind of start that can change everything." I looked at her then. Really looked at her. At the certainty in her eyes. At the way she spoke about my life savings as if it were already hers to direct. And that was when I understood something very clearly. This wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't even a request anymore. It was an expectation. So I nodded slowly. As if I was considering it. As if I was almost convinced. And I said, "I see." Because the more they explained, the more they revealed. And the more they revealed, the easier it became to see exactly where they believed the power was. They thought this meeting was about getting my agreement. They thought they were one step away from access. They had no idea. They had already walked into the part of the plan where I stopped listening and started confirming. I didn't agree to anything that day. I didn't refuse either. I just closed the folder, took a small sip of my tea, and let the silence sit between us a little longer than they expected. "I'll need some time to think," I said finally. Melissa nodded immediately, almost too quickly. "Of course," she replied, "we want you to feel completely comfortable." Comfortable. That word again. Daniel gave a small exhale beside her, like something had been temporarily resolved. They thought hesitation meant uncertainty. They thought time meant I was weighing their idea. I wasn't. I was measuring them. We said our goodbyes shortly after. Melissa stood first, smoothing her coat, her movements precise as always. Daniel followed, giving me a brief hug that felt more like obligation than affection. "Let us know, Mom," he said quietly. I nodded. "I will." I stayed at the table after they left. The cafe had grown busier around me, cups clinking. Quiet conversations, footsteps passing by, life moving forward, as if nothing had just happened. I sat there a few minutes longer, replaying every word in my mind. Not emotionally, not painfully. Just clearly. They hadn't asked for permission. They had assumed it. That was the difference. When I got home, I didn't go to the kitchen. I didn't sit down. I went straight to the study. The one room in the house I rarely used after my husband passed. His desk was still there. His chair, his files. Everything exactly where he left it. I hesitated at the doorway for a moment, then stepped inside. The air in that room felt different. Heavier. Like it still held pieces of him. I walked to the desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside were folders, organized. Labeled in his handwriting. Neat, careful. He had always believed in keeping things in order. Even things I never thought I would need to understand. I pulled out the folder marked, Accounts, Primary and Trust. Set it on the desk. Opened it. Page after page. Documents I had seen before but never truly read. Signatures I remembered giving, without knowing what they protected. But this time, I read everything. Slowly. Carefully. And the more I read, the more something became very clear. My husband hadn't just organized our finances. He had structured them. Layered them. Protected them in ways that weren't obvious from the surface. There were provisions. Conditions. Limits that didn't show up in simple summaries or investment proposals. And then I found it. A section I didn't remember seeing before. Not because it was hidden, but because I had never thought to look for it. A clause tied to large asset transfers. Not just requiring my signature, but giving me full authority to pause, deny, or permanently block any request that didn't serve my direct interest. I sat back slowly in the chair. Not shocked. Not even surprised. Just certain. Melissa had built her plan on what she could see. The account balance, the access point, the assumption that I would follow. But she hadn't seen this. She hadn't asked the right questions. And Daniel. He had trusted the wrong person to lead him. I closed the folder gently and rested my hand on top of it. Because now, this wasn't about stopping them. It was about letting them go far enough to understand exactly what they had tried to take. The call came the next morning. I was in the kitchen, standing by the sink, watching the coffee drip slowly into the pot. The house was quiet again. Still, familiar. Then my phone buzzed. Melissa. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. "Good morning," I said. Her voice came through bright, almost cheerful. "Hi, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "No," I replied. "Go ahead." A small pause. Then she moved straight to it. "I was just checking in to see if you'd had a chance to think about everything we discussed." Of course she was. They hadn't waited long. I leaned slightly against the counter, holding the phone with one hand. "I have," I said calmly. "And?" she asked. I could hear the expectation in her voice. Not curiosity, not concern. Expectation. "I think we should move forward," I said. Silence. Just for a second. Then, "That's great," she replied quickly, her tone lifting just a little higher. "I knew you'd see the bigger picture." Of course she did. "I'll need you to come by the bank with me," I continued. Another pause, smaller this time. "The bank?" "Yes," I said. "For a transfer of that size, I'd prefer to handle it in person." That part wasn't even a lie. "I can arrange that," she said, recovering quickly. "Daniel's free tomorrow morning. We can all go together." "All of us." "Tomorrow works," I replied. We ended the call shortly after. No extra words, no hesitation. Just agreement. I set the phone down on the counter and turned off the coffee machine. The kitchen filled with that familiar smell, warm, steady, unchanged. But nothing else was the same. Because now, they believed they had it. That afternoon, Daniel sent a message confirming the time. 10:30 a.m. Same branch. Melissa added a short reply in the group thread. "Thank you for trusting us with this. We're doing the right thing." I read it once. Then I put the phone down. Trust. That word again. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Not formal, not casual. Just deliberate. The kind of outfit that doesn't draw attention, but makes people take you seriously. I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment before leaving. Not searching for anything. Just confirming. When I arrived at the bank, they were already there. Melissa stood near the entrance, checking her phone. Daniel was beside her, hands in his pockets, looking around like he didn't quite know where to focus. They both looked up when I walked in. Melissa smiled immediately. Daniel nodded. "Mom." We didn't linger in the lobby. Melissa had already arranged the appointment. Of course she had. They led us into a private office. Same kind of room as before. Clean, quiet, controlled. A man I hadn't met before introduced himself and sat across from us. "Mrs. Carter, I understand you're here to discuss a large transfer." I nodded. "Yes." Melissa leaned forward slightly, placing the folder on the desk again. "The same one. Neatly organized. Ready. We've prepared everything," she said smoothly. Of course she had. The banker opened the folder, scanning the documents. Then he looked up at me. "Before we proceed, I'll need your confirmation on a few details." I met his gaze calmly. "Of course." He began reading through the terms. Account numbers, transfer amounts, authorization requirements. Everything exactly as it appeared on paper. And across from me, Melissa sat perfectly still. Confident. Certain. Daniel avoided my eyes. I listened. Every word. Every condition. Every step they believed would lead to that moment. Where I would sign. The banker paused, placing the pen gently on the desk in front of me. "All I need now is your authorization, Mrs. Carter." The room went quiet. Not tense. Not loud. Just still. Melissa's eyes moved to the pen. Then to me. Waiting. And I realized something. This was the moment they had been working toward. The moment they thought would change everything. So I reached forward. And picked up the pen. Because sometimes, The only way to show someone the truth is to let them believe they're about to win. I held the pen in my hand. Not tightly, not hesitantly. Just steady. Across from me, Melissa leaned forward ever so slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I did. Because that was the moment she believed it was done. "Mrs. Carter," the banker said gently, "once you sign, we'll begin the authorization process." I nodded. "I understand." I lowered the pen toward the paper. Let it hover there for a second. Long enough for the room to settle into that quiet expectation. Then I stopped. "Before I sign," I said calmly, "I'd like to confirm something." The banker looked up. "Of course." I turned my gaze slightly. Not at Melissa, but at him. "For a transfer of this size," I continued, "there are additional verification steps, correct?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. And those steps require direct confirmation from me, beyond just this signature." Another nod. "That's correct." I set the pen down gently on the table. Melissa's expression didn't change immediately. But I saw it. That small shift. That first crack. "I'd like to initiate that verification now," I said. The banker paused, then reached for his keyboard. "Of course." He typed for a few seconds. Then the screen in front of him changed. His posture shifted slightly as he read something more carefully this time. "I'm seeing a note here," he said slowly. I remained still. "A restriction on large transfers from this account," he continued. "Any transaction above a certain threshold requires secondary authorization, and may be subject to review or denial based on the account holder's discretion." Silence. Melissa turned her head toward him. "What does that mean?" she asked. Her tone still controlled, but thinner now. He glanced at her briefly. "It means the account holder has full authority to approve, pause, or permanently block the transaction, even after initial authorization." Even after. I folded my hands in my lap. Daniel finally looked at me. Confused. "Mom?" I met his eyes. Calm. Clear. "I asked your father to make sure I would always have final say," I said quietly. Melissa's voice came sharper this time. "But you agreed to this. We're here to move forward." I turned to her then. Not angry. Not raised. Just direct. "I agreed to review it," I said. Another pause. The kind that doesn't go away quickly. The banker cleared his throat lightly. "Mrs. Carter, would you like to proceed with the transfer, or place a hold on it?" I didn't answer right away. Because this wasn't about the money anymore. It was about letting them understand exactly what they had walked into. I looked down at the documents one last time. Then back up. "Place a hold," I said. The words landed quietly. But they didn't need to be loud. Melissa leaned back in her chair, her composure slipping just enough to show it. "That's not what we discussed," she said. "No," I replied softly. "It's not." Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because for the first time, there was nothing left to agree with. The banker nodded and began typing. "Understood. The transfer will be blocked pending further instruction." And just like that, everything they had planned stopped. I picked up my purse. Stood up slowly. No rush. No scene. Just finished. Because sometimes, you don't need to fight to take control. You just need to remind people who never lost it. I didn't wait for them to follow me out. I didn't look back either. Because some things don't need a second glance. The hallway outside the office was quiet. Soft carpet, muted footsteps, the kind of place where everything is designed to feel controlled, predictable. I walked toward the exit at the same steady pace I had walked in. Not faster, not slower. Just finished. Behind me, I could hear movement. Chairs shifting. A voice, Melissa's, lower now. Sharper than before. But I didn't turn around. Because I already knew what that sounded like. Control, slipping. "Mom, wait." Daniel's voice. Closer this time. I stopped. Not immediately. Just long enough for him to catch up. I turned slightly. Enough to face him, but not enough to invite anything more than what needed to be said. He looked different up close. Not angry. Not even defensive. Just uncertain. "What just happened?" he asked. Simple question. But not an honest one. I looked at him for a moment. The same face I had known his entire life, now searching for answers he should have asked much earlier. "You asked me to give you everything your father and I built," I said quietly. He shook his head. Quick, almost automatic. "That's not." "It is," I said, not raising my voice. Silence. He looked down for a second, then back at me. "We were trying to do something smart," he said, "something that would help." "Help who?" I asked. That stopped him. Not because the question was complicated. Because it wasn't. Behind him, I saw Melissa step out into the hallway. Her posture still straight. But her eyes, different now. No smile. No softness. "This doesn't have to be a problem," she said, walking toward us. "We can revisit the structure. Adjust the terms. There are other ways to make this work." I listened. The same voice. The same tone. But now, without the certainty. "I'm not interested in making it work," I said calmly. She stopped. Just a few steps away. "Then what are you interested in?" she asked. I met her eyes. Not with anger. Not with judgment. Just clarity. "Understanding," I said. Another pause. "Understanding how you came into my home, and decided you had a say in everything I own." Her expression tightened. Just slightly. "That's not fair," she said. I didn't respond to that. Because fairness had nothing to do with this anymore. I turned back to Daniel. "You didn't ask me if I was okay," I said. He blinked. Caught off guard. "You didn't ask me if I needed anything, after your father passed." I continued. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. "You asked for access," I said. The words didn't need emphasis. They carried themselves. Silence filled the space between us again. But this time, it stayed. I adjusted my purse on my shoulder. "I'm not angry," I said. "And I'm not confused." I let that sit for a second. I just see things clearly now. Melissa didn't say anything. Daniel didn't either. Because there wasn't anything left to explain. So I turned. And walked away. Not because I was leaving them behind. But because, for the first time, I wasn't waiting for them to follow. The house felt quieter that evening. Not empty. Just settled. I placed my keys on the same table by the door. The one my husband used to tap twice every time he came home. A small habit, one I never noticed until it stopped. I stood there for a moment, listening. No voices, no tension, no waiting. Just silence, the kind that no longer asked anything from me. I walked into the kitchen and set the kettle on the stove. The same routine, the same movements. But this time, I wasn't doing it out of habit. I was choosing it. As the water began to heat, I glanced toward the dining table. 3 chairs. Still in place. But they felt different now. Not because anything had changed physically. But because I had. For a long time, I thought holding a family together meant saying yes. Yes to requests, yes to compromises, yes to things that didn't feel right, just to keep the peace. But peace built on silence isn't peace at all. The kettle whistled softly, pulling me back. I poured the water into my cup and carried it to the living room. Settling into the chair by the window. My chair. The one I had avoided for months because it reminded me too much of everything I had lost. Tonight, it felt different. I sat there, holding the warmth in my hands, watching the light fade slowly outside. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about what they had tried to take. I was thinking about what I had kept. Not just the savings. Not just the house. My voice. My judgment. My place in my own life. My phone buzzed once on the side table. A message. Daniel. I didn't reach for it immediately. I let it sit there. Because some things don't need to be answered right away. And some things don't need to be answered at all. When I finally picked it up, I read the message quietly. Mom, I didn't realize. I'm sorry. I looked at the words for a moment. Not searching for meaning. Just seeing them for what they were. Then I set the phone back down. No reply. Not yet. Because understanding doesn't come from one sentence. And trust doesn't return in a moment. I took another sip of tea and leaned back in my chair. The house around me felt steady. Familiar. Mine. They thought I was just an old woman. Someone who wouldn't question, wouldn't notice, wouldn't fight back. But they forgot something simple. I was there from the beginning. I built this life. I protected it. And I know exactly what it's worth. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to prove anything. I just needed to remember that nothing leaves my hands unless I choose to let it go. And this time, I didn't.